All right, so we've got a pretty intense collection of documents here about the Science of Identity Foundation. SIF, yeah. And its founder, Chris Butler. We've got court documents, articles, forum posts, even social media comments. A real mix.
Wow, quite the assortment there.
It is. And it seems like you're especially interested in this, unwavering loyalty that SIF followers have, and this fear of criticizing Butler or the organization.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic, and it's particularly interesting when you consider Tulsi Gabbard's upbringing within SIF.
Right, and how that might have, shaped her life and her political career.
Exactly. And, one of the things that really stood out to me was this whole thing about SIF's control over information. Did you know followers are actually forbidden from reading about SIF on the internet?
Yeah, that definitely jumped out at me, too, especially from those forum posts.
Oh, yeah.
Former members talking about being, reprimanded for even looking up SIF online. It's they're creating this information bubble.
Right, and that raises some serious concerns, without access to outside perspectives. How can anyone really evaluate what they're being told?
How can you think critically when you're only getting one side of the story?
Exactly. It creates an environment that's just ripe for potential manipulation.
For sure. And then you bring in Tulsi Gabbard. She was raised in this SIF environment, right? Attending their schools, internalizing Butler's teachings from a young age.
It makes you wonder how much of her worldview stems from that upbringing.
It really does, and especially her loyalty to Butler. She refers to him as her guru dev.
Yeah, which indicates a deep reverence and devotion.
So it makes you think, how might this impact her political stances? Especially when you consider that she was raised to believe that Butler's word is, absolute truth.
That's a really interesting point. And speaking of Butler, what kind of picture did these sources paint of him? Because there seems to be this disconnect between his public persona and the private behavior described by some former members.
Yeah, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde situation.
Right, they leaked letters and forum posts are very revealing. They show a man who's prone to these angry outbursts and using demeaning language towards his disciples.
What kind of language?
Well, he uses terms like a-holes and even stronger expletives. It's pretty shocking considering the serene spiritual leader image that's often projected.
Wow, that's a pretty stark contrast. It's like he's carefully crafting this public image that's completely different from his private behavior.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if this harsher side of him was ever revealed to followers like Gabbard, who were so deeply immersed in the SIF world.
Right. Were they ever exposed to that side of him, or was it always this, carefully curated persona?
It's a question worth exploring. But it's not just the harsh language that's concerning. There are also allegations about Butler's financial control over SIF.
Oh, absolutely. Several sources point to him blurring the lines between organizational funds and his own personal expenses.
Like that leaked letter where he's furious about a disciple using SIF funds to buy MLA. Exactly. He claimed that money belonged to him personally. He even, cursed at the disciple in the letter.
That's crazy. It just doesn't sit right. It suggests a sense of entitlement and a lack of clear boundaries within the organization.
And when you consider the allegations that Butler was living this lavish lifestyle, it makes you question where all those donations were actually going.
Seriously, where was all that money going? And then there's that other letter where he's urging his followers to take whatever steps necessary to make sure the organization doesn't run out of cash.
Yeah, that one's pretty alarming too, especially when you combine it with the allegations of personal enrichment.
It's unsettling to think that people who are so dedicated to a spiritual path might be unknowingly contributing to something that's not what it seems.
For sure. And when you factor in the strict information control within SIF, it creates a very specific dynamic.
It does. It's a system where questioning is discouraged, loyalty is paramount, and financial practices are shrouded in secrecy.
And it makes you think about the impact this could have on someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who was raised believing that Butler was like a divine figure.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. We've got a long way to go with this deep dive, but I think we're off to a good start.
Agreed. Let's delve deeper into Gabbard's upbringing within SIF and see how this environment might have influenced her political career.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
These SIF-run schools, man, they're really something else. We're talking about an environment where Butler's teachings are completely woven into the curriculum.
It's not just your typical education, huh?
Not at all. It's a full-on immersion into his specific worldview.
And from what I'm seeing in these sources, that worldview includes some pretty pretty controversial stances, like his views on homosexuality, for instance.
Yeah, his views on homosexuality are definitely on the harsher end of the spectrum.
You could say that again.
There are all these quotes from his recorded lectures where he just flat out condemns it.
What does he say?
Oh, using terms like unnatural and immoral, the whole 9 yards. And according to former members, these lectures were played regularly for children at SIF schools.
Seriously?
Yeah.
They were playing these lectures to kids. That's messed up. Exposing children to such strong rhetoric, especially in an educational setting. I mean, come on.
Yeah, it definitely raises some ethical red flags, and it adds another layer to understanding Tulsi Gabbard's early political positions.
Which align pretty closely with those homophobic views.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how much of that stance was actually hers and how much was just a product of her upbringing.
It's a tough question to answer. But it highlights how this environment where critical thinking is discouraged and loyalty to Butler is everything could really have a lasting impact on someone's beliefs and choices.
Absolutely. It's like they're being conditioned from a young age.
And it makes you think about the effectiveness of SIF's information control in this day and age, with the internet and all.
Right. It's one thing to restrict access to outside info, but how do you prevent people from just getting curious?
Especially with someone like Gabbard, who's been in the public eye for so long. You'd think she would come across information that challenges the SIF narrative at some point.
You would think so. Maybe that deep-seated belief system and the fear of repercussions for questioning it are just too powerful.
The fear factor is definitely real. Those former members talk about the social pressure within SIF, like the self-policing that goes on.
Right. It's like this unspoken code of conduct.
And the consequences for straying from the path can be pretty intense.
Isolation, shunning, you name it.
So for those who did manage to leave SIF, what were their experiences like? I imagine it wasn't easy.
Their stories are fascinating. They talk about a sense of isolation, fear of retribution, and just the struggle to rebuild their lives outside of SIF's influence.
That takes serious guts. It's a testament to their resilience.
It really is. And they provide such a valuable perspective on the inner workings of SIF and the lasting impact it can have.
It's a reminder that even within these seemingly positive and spiritual communities, there can be a dark side.
The dark side, yeah. There's always the potential for harm when critical thinking is suppressed.
So we've talked about the information control, the impact of Butler's teachings, especially on Gabbard's upbringing. But let's not forget about the bigger picture, their political activities in Hawaii. What's the story there?
Well, SIF members have been involved in Hawaiian politics for decades, and their influence is pretty undeniable.
Especially within the Gabbard family.
Exactly. Mike Gabbard Tulsi's father is a devout follower of Butler, and his political career definitely benefited from the support of SIF members.
And then, of course, there's Tulsi herself, who rose through the ranks of Hawaiian politics and became a U.S. congresswoman. How much of her success can we attribute to SIF's backing?
It's hard to say for sure, but I'd say it played a significant role. Remember, SIF members are deeply devoted to Butler and his teachings, and that devotion extends to supporting those he endorses.
So it was like a built-in support system.
Pretty much. And it makes you think about those potential conflicts of interest when personal loyalty to a religious leader intersects with public service.
Yeah, it blurs the lines a bit. Right. Transparency and ethical conduct are kind of crucial for anyone in a position of power.
Especially for those with strong ties to organizations like SIF.
Okay, so we've got this web of religious devotion, information control, political influence, and personal loyalty. But there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to talk about, that connection between SIF and QNet.
Oh yeah, that multi-level marketing company.
The one that's been accused of being a pyramid scheme.
That's the one. What can you tell us about this link and why it matters?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The key player here is Joseph Bismark.
Bismark.
Yeah, he's a longtime devotee of Butler and a co-founder of QNet.
Wait a minute, Bismark? That name rings a bell. Didn't he come up in one of those liked letters?
You got it. That letter where Butler's ranting about his disciples not being generous enough.
The one where he calls them a-holes.
That's the one. And Bismark is mentioned right there in the mix, which kind of hints at the financial expectations Butler had of his followers. Interesting. But the real kicker is that QNet, the company Bismark co-founded, has been accused of being a pyramid scheme and investigated for financial misconduct in multiple countries. So we've got this potential conflict of interest. A prominent SIF member involved with the company accused of exploiting people financially. And given Butler's close relationship with Bismarck, it raises questions about his awareness of these activities.
Definitely makes you wonder if any SIF members got caught up in QNet's schemes.
Especially since SIF discourages seeking outside info. It's like a recipe for vulnerability.
You said it. It's like they're operating within this bubble where critical thinking is discouraged, and they might not have the tools to evaluate organizations like QNet properly.
This whole thing is a bit of a tangled web. Intense loyalty information, control political influence, and now potential financial exploitation.
It's a reminder that even in seemingly positive settings, things aren't always what they appear. Power dynamics can be complex, and the potential for harm is always there lurking beneath the surface.
So where do we go from here? What else can we learn from these documents about the impact of SIF and QNet on its members? It's really striking how deep this loyalty runs within SIF, but what about the people who left? The sources mention some former members are pretty outspoken against the organization.
Yeah, and their stories are really valuable. They give us this inside look at how SIF operates and the lasting effects it can have on people. They talk about feeling isolated, afraid to speak up, and the struggle to break free from this belief system that's been ingrained in them for so long.
Some of the most powerful accounts come from those who grew up in SIF, like those who went to the SIF schools. Imagine having to question everything you've ever known.
It must be incredibly difficult to challenge a worldview that's been instilled in you since childhood, facing rejection from your community and family and having to rebuild your identity outside of that system. That's a huge undertaking. But these former members are brave enough to share their experiences, even if it means putting themselves at risk.
Their stories really highlight the power dynamics within SIF, especially the control over information and the emphasis on obedience. It creates an atmosphere where critical thinking is stifled and questioning Butler or his teachings is taboo.
Exactly. And when you add in the fear of social isolation and potential consequences, it's understandable why people would stay silent even if they have doubts.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant and think critically even within spiritual communities. Blind faith and unquestioning obedience can make people vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation.
You're absolutely right. And it brings us back to the QNet connection. Given the culture of loyalty and information control within SIF, it's worth considering if members were more susceptible to being recruited into QNet.
Especially since QNet's business practices have been criticized with accusations of it being a pyramid scheme and using deceptive marketing. If SIF members were discouraged from looking for outside information, they might not have been aware of these controversies.
Exactly. They might have missed those red flags. And that's where the ethical implications become even more serious.
This QNet connection brings up a lot of questions. Was Butler aware of the controversies surrounding QNet? Did he approve of Bismarck's involvement? Did any SIF members lose money because they participated in QNet?
Those are tough questions to answer for sure based on what we have right now. But the connection itself raises serious concerns about potential conflicts of interest, ethical leadership, and the potential for harm within a community that prioritizes unquestioning loyalty.
It's a stark reminder that even in organizations that present themselves as positive and spiritual, critical thinking and accountability are absolutely essential.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the key takeaway for our listeners today. Whether it's a religious organization, a political movement, or any group that demands unwavering loyalty, we need to approach these situations with a critical eye and be wary of those who discourage questioning or independent thought.
That's a great point. Blind faith can be dangerous, and it's crucial to develop a healthy sense of skepticism. We need to seek out different perspectives and be willing to challenge authority, even those we respect.
Absolutely. And if we come across individuals or organizations that show these red flags, we need to be cautious, ask questions, and prioritize our own well-being and autonomy.
Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive into loyalty belief and the potential for harm within systems that discourage critical thinking. Thanks for walking us through it.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, remember, knowledge is power, but only when it's combined with critical thinking and a willingness to question the narratives we're given.
That's right. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay critical. Until next time.